everyone, and welcome to a brand new spoiler review episode for episode 3 of the Acolyte, brought to you by the
Geek Buddies.
Hey! The power of many. We have so much to discuss here today for the Acolyte episode 3. So much to jump into. Thank you so much for joining us on this, what we do now, the Geek Bites, so these special review episodes or special topic episodes. And we have fun discussing things that we discuss in these episodes for sure. And there's a lot to discuss in this particular episode here. But first, let's introduce ourselves. I am the Outlaw John Rocha, writer, producer, and host here on the Geek Buddies.
I am Michael Vogel. I'm a writer and producer of animated TV shows and movies.
And this is Shannon McClung. I'm a television actor and an animation writer, where you can see some of our current work on YouTube and Netflix. On Netflix, seasons 1 and 2 of Strawberry Shortcake, Barry in the Big City. On YouTube, seasons 1, 2, and 3 of Strawberry Shortcake in the Big City, Barry in the Big City. And on Netflix, you can see our 4 holiday seasonal specials as well. Strawberry Shortcake.
Listen, man, you got to share the workload with people. You can't carry the
I like listening to him do it. I like listening to him do it. He does it so well.
Oh, I've watched the episodes when I'm not on it, and you try to talk about your own credits.
He's a humble man. He'll be the first one.
I retract my compliment from a few seconds ago.
All right, here we go. Destiny, episode 3, directed by Kogonada, who is a director who did After Yang and Columbus. After Yang with Jodie Turner-Smith, of course, reunited to be a part of this episode here with mother Aniseya. So there's a lot. Aniseya. I get the consonants mixed up all the time now. I don't know.
We've noticed.
Yeah, I know. Maybe is it a late, something's happening late in life? I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, we got so much in this episode here with May and Osha, essentially being the dark and the light side of the Force here. We hear about their creation that is, quote, unnatural. So what does that mean? Is it related to black magic, dark side of the Force? And I've already seen people going crazy about the connections to Anakin and the connections overall, this idea of not having a father and, immaculate conception type of stuff. But also this episode really went after the Jedi and how the Jedi take children from their families, and this smashing together of, well, from one point of view, you're a bunch of crazed monks. From another point of view, you're a dark cult operating outside the Republic's sphere. So there's a lot here that was smashing together, but at the core of it was May and Osha and the Ascension ceremony, and Osha making it very clear that she wanted to be a Jedi. And then we led to what we've been talking about for the first 2 episodes, is this fire and the death of their entire coven there, and their mother, both their mothers, and May surviving it without Osha's knowledge of her surviving it, and Osha surviving without May's knowledge of Osha surviving. So, Michael, your overall thoughts on this episode? A lot of the fandom, or not a lot, but there's certain sections of fandom that are certainly upset about it. But what is your thoughts? And there's some people who love it. So what are your thoughts on this episode?
I am neither of those people. I was a little bit underwhelmed.
Okay.
And I think because there was sort of this promise, from people who were like, wow, this really shifts the Star Wars narrative, or the people that are like, this ruined Star Wars and shits all over George Lucas's dream. Right. And so I was expecting something big, and I don't think I really got anything that big. I mean, there's definitely more of this story to tell. We're kind of, I think, doing a little bit of a Rashomon style story where we're like, this story is Osha's perspective. Right. This is how Osha views her life on Brendok. This is how Osha views the Jedi. We see Osha go in. We see Osha get locked away. And then we see what Osha sees when she come out. We don't really see what May sees. We don't see what the Jedi see. And there's definitely more going on. But I think that there was a lot of interesting things here. But I also think from a directing standpoint, there was a lot of things that just missed the mark. I think there was a lot more that could have been done. I actually don't have anything. I have no issue with the story. I don't think that what Aniseya and her coven did to seemingly create Osha and May somehow contradicts anything about Darth Plagueis or Anakin or the Force or literally anything. I do not think any of this in any way contradicts anything, and we can get into details on that in a little bit. But I think the combination of some of the storytelling feeling like it was a little bit flat, some of the characterizations feeling like there was more that could have been done, and then the fact that particularly Osha, I found very annoying. I think that I think that directing children is a very specific skill.
Yeah.
And I don't blame either of these kids. I think both of these kids seem like very capable actors. But I think that it's hard to direct kids and get what you want out of it. And I don't know that directing kids is necessarily Leslye Headland's strong suit.
Well, she didn't direct the episode, to be
Oh,
fair.
you're right. You're absolutely right. So yeah, I don't think it was their strong suit.
Okay, fair point. Shannon, do you share Michael's hatred of child actors, or what is your thoughts on this particular episode? What did you feel about the overall story? And do you agree with Michael that it didn't really bust the lore that much, or cause all this hand wringing that we see going on from certain sections of the Star Wars fan?
I was so curious to see what was going to happen, because like it messes with canon, and it destroys established premises when Star Wars. I'm like, boy, what's going to happen? I'm like, okay, a matriarchal society of witches, which we've seen with the Night Sisters. Okay, the fact that they call the Force the thread, I think makes perfect sense when you have a large universe. Different societies are going to view different concepts differently. They're going to have different names.
Yeah.
You think about not to get into this, but like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, like it's all the God of Abraham, but we all got a different name for him. So it's that type of thing that I was like, I think that's interesting. I love the fact that the witches have a different name for the Force.
Yeah.
The episode as a whole, as just one episode of storytelling, to me was vastly superior to the first two. I was like, this is in a vacuum, this is a really good story that's being told. I fully agree with Vogel about the direction. I mean, I think there are some kind of sloppy, lazy things that I'm like, why did you choose to do this? Why didn't you tighten up here? Like I think there are ways to make the storytelling a little more efficient. The performances, like I agree, like directing kids is difficult. And they were fine. Like they didn't stick out to me as much as maybe they did to Mike. But I thought the performances from the adults were really good. I mean, despite the fact that I thought there's some silly writing that again I think could have been smoothed over. And it's always shocking to me when you get kind of those sillier kind of wonky moments, because you can't just blame the writers, you can't just blame Leslye Headland, you got to blame the executives over at Lucasfilm too, because someone's reading that and saying okay. So there's a lot of blame to be shared in the things that don't work.
Fair point. And maybe, how can I say this? And maybe some of us have heard that certain people are going in and adding more kiddie elements or younger elements to scripts to make them a little more relatable from their own point of view. Yeah, I'm going to say that. But here's the thing: I think this is the best episode so far.
Was it the fratricide, or the large scale death, or the calling Jedi monks that was the chill kitty part? I'm just trying to get clarity.
Mommy's doing the Force is more of that kind of stuff. But anyway, listen. The thing is, I think this is the best episode so far of the season. I agree with Shannon. This was levels above the first two episodes, because this was about something, and it was dark, it was gritty, it was interesting when it was allowed to be. Some of the other stuff, like the black box sitting around doing the screaming and then having the choir join, that I could have done without. But like overall, though, I felt that there was something strong being said here about the dark and the light side of the Force. And Michael, you make an excellent point, and this is important for people to remember. This is from Osha's point of view. Right? From Osha's point of view, May is misusing the Force. May is angry. May's the one doing all these things. May's the one I saw with the fire. You know, from Osha's point of view, I'm the struggling person who is trying to break out of this coven of witches. I wanted to go be the things I wanted to be. So sometimes we are subject to our own narratives that we create in our lives. And so I like that we got it from her point of view. There is no way that we're not seeing this story again from different points of view. As Michael said, the Rashomon approach. What are the Jedi's role in all of this? Because while everything is happening, there's an explosion and a choir of voices that you hear in an explosion above a grill as Osha is running there when she's found her way out of the fire. So who caused the explosion? What was involved in the explosion? And what happened here? So there's going to be questions down the road that are going to be answered. But I liked it. And I liked that it challenges the lore. Shannon said Christianity, Judaism, Muslim, fine. But within those sects, there's divisions about how to believe in Christ. there's division or God or the energy or whatever it is that you want to believe in. So the fact that there's a coven of witches who teaches the Force in a certain way, and by the way, they weren't presented as evil people. There was only one moment, and that was when the mother there Aniseya turned Torben's eyes black and controlled him in that moment and said, "If you want your Padawan back, you'll leave us alone." So there was just occasional moments, other than the other mother being like very, protective of her kids and forceful about it because, she's from Darth Maul's people. That makes sense. So I thought to me, this was a fantastic exploration of questioning the Jedi and their approach here of taking children from their families, of being the Force. Indara comes in there and says to her, "Hey, it's our right to test your children. I mean, with your permission, of course, but it's our right." So this idea of like, well, how much are you using your power to force people, to indoctrinate people into your way of thinking? So I thought there was a lot here that was very interesting to explore in the show in this particular episode. But Michael, I swing back to you. The May and Osha situation, aside from the acting, though, what did you think of the storyline and the way it was laid out here? And of course, factoring in what you said through Osha's point of view, but we got to see more of May. We got to see more of Osha. May clearly being portrayed as someone who has a connection to the darker side of the Force. Osha seeing as someone who is the lighter side of the Force, not wanting to be a witch, wanting to go be a Jedi, wanting to separate from the family and walk her own path. What did you think about how they portrayed this and how the storyline ended up with May possibly causing the fire? Because we really don't know. And their constant bickering and battling throughout until one supposedly dies as the platform breaks.
Yeah, well, the last thing I'll say about the acting is, because I actually think what was written and what was established between the two of them as characters is really interesting. Yep. And I felt like the performances or the directing of the performances kind of allowed it to be just sort of one note. There was a lot of just like, why did you do that? I don't know. Why did you do that? Or like, to your point, their little slap fight while Aniseya was training them, I don't think was there to be kiddie. I think that's just bad directing. I think that's like, you guys need to get in a fight. So the kids just did what kids do. But since there's no reason for the fight, it just comes across as really silly and goofy. So I don't think that was like, oh, that'll be cute. I think that was like, you didn't really give those kids actual directions. That being said, all that aside, Osha being this sort of, even right off the bat, I did like the visuals of like, she clearly can use the Force. Like she's like looking at this little bird, worm, hummingbird thing, and she does freeze it briefly with the Force and she lets it go. And then May comes in and like holds on to it and she tells her to let go. And right off the bat, you get a really interesting dynamic, which is that this whole like twin rhyme that they have that we learned in the first episode, that's really, May's all about that. May is all about being twins. May is all about, I don't want Osha to go anywhere. My identity is that we are a two. We do everything together. And Osha is really straining against this. Like Osha does not want anything to do with it. Her path is going down a different road. It looks like she's drawing the Jedi symbol in her little triangle coloring book. Like she really just is longing for something. I don't even know that she's particularly longing to be a Jedi. Aside from what she's drawing in her book, the Jedi seem to be just like, you're my ticket out of here. Like you are an option that I don't have otherwise. But her desire to not be there, and having nothing to do, like she clearly loves her moms. Yeah. She clearly like cares about Aniseya particularly. Like it's not like I think you guys are evil. I think you're bad. She just wants to be gone. But May's almost smothering of Osha reminds me, this is straight up like Anakin loves Padme so much he chokes her. Like this is very much there is someone in my life. This is where you get sort of the Jedi rule of attachment that is really pretty silly and whatever, but it's when you have a character who is of the dark side that is so attached to a person that is their flaw. That was Anakin and Padme, and that seems to be May and Osha. So I thought all of that was really, really interesting, and I liked the way they built it all out. I also like that we don't have the full story. There are some really key moments here where like Koril takes May away, or May sees things that are happening while Osha's locked inside, where there are big chunks of this story that are missing. I've seen a lot of people online being like, oh wow, these witches are so powerful that they can create twins from nothing, but a candle destroyed them all. And I'm like, okay, guys, that's not the full story.
Yeah.
All those witches lying in a pile did not burn to death from a candle. Like, that is not how this went down.
burn marks on them.
Yeah, so I do think that's a new, but so I did like the way, and I also like, it was unclear at the end of the last episode when May and Osha saw each other for the first time. You were like, oh, were these two best friends? Did they love each other so much? And then they were torn apart. But like, no, like this division between them and May being really sort of like, Osha, you can't do what you want to do. We are together forever. And Osha being like, this is not my path. That was all seeded very early on. So I thought that was all really interesting.
Great. Shannon, your thoughts on the May and Osha relationship and how this progressed throughout this particular episode between them?
I mean, I think this is one of the things that really worked because, I mean, just from a storytelling perspective, this is very, very simple. That you have two people that are essentially one person split in half. So you would think, okay, you know, you're going to be exactly the same. You find out very quickly that they're not. I do think this is an area where the direction could have been amped up a little bit to kind of dial down on some of the like the kitty irritation. Even just with Osha, you know, playing with the hummingbird worm butterfly thing, there wasn't much difference between the creature's reaction to being held by the Force from Osha nor May. And this is not to say that May is, you know, a sociopath and like needs to try to squeeze it, but to see some difference, like it was literally the same thing. It was more Osha saying, don't play with my stuff. Like that's mine. You don't get to do that. And so I think even though it was from Osha's point of view, I think directorially everything could have been amped up. It could have been amped up a little bit. The way everything was laid out, it was nice. I mean, again, the story is not the issue of the episode. It's the way the story was being executed. The whole thing with them bickering in the background, that was just really, really bad. I mean, generally what you want to do, because the information that Mother Aniseya is giving is important information. As an audience, you want to hear it. But there is a way to focus on the kids being kids and having a little squabble. There's a way to do it without it seeming so rookie-like. Like it was just like, you know, go in tight, have them whisper, watch the build of this as we're still getting the information. There is a way to do it, and especially at a 44-minute running time, you have some runway, and you should use it.
Yeah, the directorial mistake there is you're showing us Aniseya using the Force for the first time and showing the power of what she can do with the Force. But you're distracting me by showing me her two kids fighting in the background and fighting. So that is a mistake. You don't want to pull the focus if you're showing something for the first time and really want to undercut her philosophy of the Force and the thread and everything that she's trying to teach the kids. We as an audience want to learn what her point of view is with the thread, with the Force, whatever she wants to call it. We want to know what it is. And by having us distracted with these two kids fighting, which is irritating, I think that was a massive mistake. You know,
there's a way to build it. It just, as Vogel already said, it was very flat.
And the solve really simply is when you have a scene like that, having two kids and say, hey, you get in an argument, those performers are going to do exactly what those kids did. But if it was a very simple, May is obsessed with what Aniseya is saying because she wants to be super strong in the Force, and Osha is distracted because she doesn't want to do the Ascension and she doesn't want to be there. And then May is like, Osha, you need to pay attention to this. Osha, pay attention. And then they get in a fight. Like that solves both things, and it gives both kids a clear thing to play, and it directs our attention to what's happening, and it solves the entire problem. So yes, I think we're all in agreement that the kids bickering was horrible.
Yeah, and the camera movement is important too. If you show Aniseya in a one shot doing what she's doing, then we as the audience are in, and then you move the camera slowly and you see the kids doing what they're doing. Then you establish both. That's the smarter move directorially anyway. But this gentleman has directed a couple of things. So I'll keep my mouth shut on that side of things. Yeah, I liked the way they laid this out. Yeah, I don't think they were the strongest performances. I'll agree with that overall, whether it's direction or their abilities. I don't know, but I certainly felt that there could have been more here. where we really establish the darkness and the lightness. And I know people are going to get mad when I say this, but I haven't always found the kids to be the strongest actors in the Star Wars franchise. And so certain moments, certain things happen, you're like, I don't know. Whereas in other films, I've seen much stronger actors or children actors convey levels and depth and complexity of scenes that are going on here. And especially you've got the light and the dark. Why isn't there a hint of why there's just an allusion to the fact that they're the only children in the Coven there when they're getting their hair done. By the way, I want a whole separate storyline with the two ladies who are doing their hair, because I'm sure they've seen some shit. And I would like to have seen more of that exploration of Osha wanting to find out how they were born, where they came from, why don't they have a father? So that could even be more of the motivation of why she wants to get away, because she wants to explore the world and see the world. She's driven from a different thing. Why am I driven this way? So just much more of the inner exploration, I think, would have been interesting, because we are getting what it seems like from her point of view. Although there are scenes where you would question how Osha would have known what was going on in those scenes. Overall, it feels very much.
Yeah, no, I'm not, just to be clear on the Rashomon aspect, I'm not saying that the entire story is all Osha's point of view and everything is what she's seen. I'm just saying, in that Rashomon style storytelling, we are getting basically, this is the pieces of the story that would lead Osha to believe what she believed for the rest of her life.
Yes.
And then we are going to get a piece of the story that fills in some gaps that make May believe what she believed. And then we are going to get some gaps, I'm assuming, that go, oh, here is why the Jedi thought what they were doing was correct. And so it's not this is all her perspective and you can look at every scene and know this. It's just, we are getting at least just 1/3 of the story right now, and we're going to get other pieces of it as we go along.
Agreed. Well, let's turn back to this idea of the way they were born. Shannon, what are your thoughts when you hear this idea of them being able to create life? She says that Aniseya says this ability was seen as, quote, dark and unnatural. And a lot of people are saying that this is reminiscent of Darth Plagueis. Some people claiming that the Sith behind all of this is Darth Plagueis. So, and remember Palpatine talking to Anakin, talking about his master's ability to create life. What are your thoughts on this as an element of Star Wars being introduced, and the backstory of this, rather, being a part of these two characters being introduced into Star Wars?
I mean, I think it's intriguing. Again, from the witch's point of view, they're saying what we are never going to be welcomed in the galaxy. Women like us, we're never going to be welcome. Even though what they're doing, there's nothing that is overtly dark side about it. I mean, again, when you compare them to the Night Sisters, there's the eerie green lights from the magic. There's the fact that the Night Sisters come off as pretty villainous. Whereas these just seem like a group of gals that want to go off and live their lives. They want to hang out on this planet, raise their two little girls. So the idea that Aniseya was able, it seems at least, was able to create them with the power of the thread or the force, I think is super intriguing. I mean, again, you look at the prequels and what Shmi Skywalker did, that's not the same situation. Shmi, I mean, unless this has been discussed in the EU that I never did a deep dive on. This just kind of happened to Shmi, whereas this was a very are you going to get into the Palpatine thing here?
Yep.
I can see. Okay. Because again, based on what the movies have presented us, I never got the fact that Palpatine was the reason that Anakin was born. But knowing that Aniseya, this was active, she did do this deliberately. I think it's intriguing. But again, I don't know the EU as much as other folks.
When you bring up Palpatine Anakin, it seems to be that some of the anger is removing the uniqueness of Anakin by having this be the backstory of another pair of characters. Yes. There haven't been multiple messiahs and multiple religions and multiple ways of things being born. And so people are upset about that aspect of it all. But Michael, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts on how they present this backstory with these two characters, and that this is the way that they were created and born, and the Koril carried them?
Yeah, I agree with Shannon. I agree with Shannon that I think it's all intriguing. I think this is an interesting avenue to explore in the backstory of Star Wars. I think that given what given what Palpatine says to Anakin at the opera in Revenge of the Sith, it is heavily implied that he used midi-chlorians to create life, which is literally what happened to Anakin. So it is heavily implied that Palpatine used midi-chlorians to impregnate Shmi Skywalker. That is then more or less confirmed in Darth Vader number 25, which is part of current Star Wars canon, not EU, that Palpatine absolutely used midi-chlorians to create Anakin, just didn't really know that it worked until Qui-Gon returned and said, oh, hey, I found this kid out in Tatooine. Mom says there's no dad. Palpatine was like, oh, shit, that's my boo. So it more or less is confirmed, if you are a Star Wars nerd and you read all the material, that Palpatine did have a Dark Force hand using midi-chlorians to create Anakin, and that he learned that from Darth Plagueis, his master, before he killed Darth Plagueis. And that Darth Plagueis was very wise and knowledgeable and knew how to do things that people deemed unnatural, which is the exact same word that comes up in this episode. Yeah. So I think, and so where people are mad is that Darth Plagueis was the first to do this or the one to do this, but it never actually says in Revenge of the Sith that he was the first. It's like he learned to do this. And if we are learning in this story that part of where Darth Plagueis learned that this was possible was because this coven of force powerful witches who used the dark side did this to create Osha and May, like, to me, that is completely within canon. All of the other shit that everyone's going crazy about Star Wars is using the Force to create lesbian babies and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh my God, shut up. Like, I can't with any of you. You all need to stop.
I agree.
Because really, this is no different than anything else that Star Wars does. I mean, we get to Return of the Jedi, and we're told that Luke is the last hope, and he's the only one who can like bring back the Jedi. And now, thanks to years of storytelling, we know that there's also there was Kanan Jarrus, there was Ezra Bridger, there's Ahsoka, there's Grogu, there's Cal Kestis. Like there's a bunch of Jedi that were running around that weren't running around when George Lucas made it. So in the same way that we've added to the story, this is just additive to that story. And I think it's interesting. I agree. And I think when you go, and I actually went back and rewatched the opera scene in Revenge of the Sith to just make sure I wasn't missing any specific terminology. But when you listen to what he says, if this is the story where this information became apparent, I think it's interesting. Also, there's a lot of debate about because Osha and May are twins, and Luke and Leia are twins, and Luke and Leia are supposed to be the twins of the Force, and this is important. But it's like, again, as we said a bunch of times, George Lucas didn't even know they were twins when he made A New Hope, and kind of using this whole twin poetry at rhymes things, I think is interesting. And then just really quickly on the witches in general. Star Wars, if you've read the Night Sisters, as Shannon pointed out, is a great example. But if you read the High Republic books, I mean, from the Path of the Open Hand to a bunch of other different religions that all existed on Jeddah when there was a giant religious war on Jeddah that wiped out half the city, there's lots of different sects in the Star Wars universe that utilize the Force in different ways and have different beliefs about the Force. So when this coven of witches show up and they use the Force in a very specific way, none of this doesn't feel intrinsically Star Wars in the way that Star Wars in more recent history has sort of been using the ideas around the Force.
I agree. You've got to expand. You've got to explore. You've got to question. I think there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of what's fun about a franchise and its extended storytelling is that, okay, how do we make it connective to what's going on? Look, in the 1970s, these films were made for a certain reason, and they were reacting to what was going on in the world. Lucas has spoke about it very clearly, what the motivation was, just like 1978 Superman. It's a reaction to what was going on in the world with Vietnam and the anger in the streets and all this kind of stuff. It was to take people's minds away and create something awesome and cool and reinstill the idea that we can be good again, that there is good in the world, that there is ways to do good in the world. Well, we're all the way past that decades later, and we're in a different time, a different approach, a different world where we question things now much more than we were beginning to question in the 70s. And so you're going to have content that's going to mirror that and reflect that. I think my issue is that this feels like it's not 100% committing to itself one way or another. It's trying to be dark or take chances, but also play it a little bit safe. And to me, that's where the smashing together of tones becomes an issue for this series. But I love this as a concept. I love it. As I said, multiple religions have multiple stories about messiahs. Why wouldn't there be multiple people who can use the Force that would create their own sects? They wouldn't want to be part of the Jedi and the way they're doing things. By the way, the Jedi quoting the Republic, essentially being the hand and the arm and the almost like, the soldiers of the Republic. That's a weird thing. How many people want to be part of the government? I'm going to create my own thing. We're all by ourselves. We're way off in this planet. No one's messing with us. And then the Jedi show up. So like they weren't, as you said, Shannon, trying to create this thing and trying to destroy the universe. And clearly this is not going to lead to something that's going to mirror Anakin or mirror what happens in that story. So it's something different. Let it breathe. Let's see what happens. There's still 5 more episodes to go. And in no way is this saying this is now how we see the Force officially in canon, in the main canon. It's saying this is how certain people use it in that section. So I thought that was interesting. What do we think, Michael, about Jodie Turner-Smith here as Aniseya? What do you think of Koril here being played by Margarita Levieve? What do you think of their performances here as the mothers and their role here in the story?
Really interesting. I thought Aniseya was great. I thought they were both great. I thought they both did a really, really nice job. I do think it's a weird... it seems very choiceful. It's a weird choice to say that Koril carried those babies, and those babies are not Zabrak babies. Like I do understand. And I think that was a choice to make it very clear that this birth is its own thing. Like Aniseya created them, Koril carried them, but they ain't got no horns. It's a little weird. Like, let's all just admit that's a little weird. But that seems to be a specific choice. And I wonder if that's ever going to be addressed, or we're just going to be like, okay, like that one did give me a little bit of a hope. But from a performance standpoint, I think what I was missing in the Jedi, which we'll get to in a little bit, is that Koril and Aniseya both had a very clear perspective.
Yeah.
Like, Koril was the mom that was like, follow the rules. If you don't follow the rules, you don't get the cookie. I have very specific, we were created for a reason, and I'll be goddamned if I didn't carry you babies in my magic midi-chlorian womb for 9 months, and you're not going to do what we want you to do. And Aniseya is a lot more like, hey, you can have the cookie. Hey, she's a little bit more indulgent. And that becomes very important later in the story when Osha's like, I want to be a Jedi.
Yeah.
Like Aniseya, and whether we find out later that Aniseya maybe wasn't as nice behind Osha's back or not, as far as this episode goes, Aniseya's like, look, the thread is the thread. And if you want to pull this thread, that's your choice to pull this thread. You're going to have to deal with the consequences, but I'm going to let you go. Like when Osha makes a choice, Aniseya is kind of like, well, that's the thread. That's where we're going. And Koril is like, no. Koril wants to fight. Koril wants to kill them Jedi and hide the children. And I could be completely off on this, but Koril carries May away when Osha and Aniseya have this really nice scene where Osha's like, I do want to be a Jedi. And Aniseya is like, don't make a choice based on fear. And she's like, no, I want to be a Jedi. And she's like, okay, I got to go talk to my ladies, but I'm going to take that under consideration. Koril takes May away. And we don't know what happens. And as much as people were thinking that Chimere might be the big mask guy by the end of this episode, there's a big contingent of people on Twitter and social media that now think Koril might be the person in the mask, and that Koril is doing some dark side shit on May, and that May is pulled away. And the next time we see May, she walks in, she goes, hey, you can't leave. I'm going to kill you. Let me light a fire. Yeah. And so what did Koril and May, what was this conversation? What was this interaction? So I think Koril being almost like militantly devoted to, you have to go down the path I want, and Aniseya being very different in that. I thought those characterizations were great. I thought the performances were great. And I thought it really added to the story.
And what do you think, Shannon, about these two performances and the characters here in this episode?
They were both fantastic. And I think what they both delivered was an authenticity and an inner life that I felt was missing from some of our cast in the first 2 episodes. Every line they both delivered was real, and you believed it. Like and I think this is just, I think this is just a trait of a more accomplished performer, of how much you are able to bring to a role, how much you're able to bring to dialogue just because of skill level and experience. Again, everything that they said, you believed. And there was definitely, like, they both had a very, very stark point of view. And you can see that playing out with the twins. I mean, I question whether or not, like, was that even May? Like, I don't know who else it would have been, but the sharp right turn that May takes, granted, after she is with Mother Koril, the sharp right turn, I'm like, this doesn't feel right. And that moment where May and Osha are on the bridge, to me, May almost seems like she doesn't know what's going on.
Right.
So I'm curious whether or not this is actually May, but I definitely think Jodie Turner-Smith and Margarita Levieva. I mean, it seems like they're dead. I hope they're not, because they both brought a lot of weight to the show.
Yeah, I enjoy.
We see Aniseya dead. I mean, we see her on the ground. We don't see Koril. As far as I can tell from that wide shot, I didn't see any Zabraks. I didn't necessarily see Koril. So Koril sort of, to me, open territory.
Koril! They're dead. Koril. No, I agree with you guys. Both phenomenal. Jodie Turner-Smith, just in the simple moments. That's where you know you're a great actor. In the simple moments, you as an audience member are like, damn, I buy every single micro emotion that is coming across her face. When she is hugging Osha after their heart-to-heart, you see when Osha tells her she wants to be a Jedi, you see the reaction. When she uses her power against Torben there, you see that she is not someone to mess with, but she's not overtly evil. She's not overtly drunk, at least in the presentation in this episode. We don't know if down the road there's something else that we didn't see that we will be shown, but certainly the way she's presented here is very grandiose, strong, a mother energy, a caring mother energy, but someone not to mess with. And so I liked that. And Koril is a great, essentially playing the stereotypical father role, being more harder edge, being pushing. Even when she says to Osha, I expected better of you. How many times have we heard that from our own fathers, for some of you watching those things? So, those are those things. She's played that role. Nowadays, of course, it's all gender fluid and they all play different roles. But back then, it certainly is or in the old days, it is the stereotype. And so I like that they played with that. The two mothers, again, commit to the fact that they're together. Stop, Disney, playing it safe. Commit. They're clearly in a relationship. They're clearly together. Let them hug. Let them kiss. Let them have tender moments. For God's sakes, I'm just saying that from my own personal point of view.
This one didn't bother me. I mean, they carried babies together. They were very tender with each other. Like, I don't know that this falls under the you had a 2-second kiss that you could easily cut out. Like, I think part of the reason a contingent of Twitter is so inflamed about this is because I think this is pretty clear to me.
Sure. All right. Anyway, let's take a break. We'll get into the Jedi after this, and we'll wrap up right after that. Right back. We're back right after this. All right. So, Shannon, let's get your thoughts on this. We have the Jedi coming in. We have Soul, a de-aged Soul, which looks like they're initially in the earlier parts of the episode spying on the two kids from behind a tree, out of breath for some reason. And then later we see them come in, and Dara, Soul, Kelnaka, Torben all come in there. We find out that Torben is her Padawan, which I don't think I knew from the first two episodes. Maybe I just missed it. But they're in there, and they essentially say, we want to test your kids. We have a right to do so. Aniseya calls him out because and Dara claims that, we thought it was uninhabited. And she's like, really? The Jedi with all your force? You think you couldn't figure out if there were people here or not? So it was a strong back and forth. And then eventually the kids are taken and they're tested. She allows it. Aniseya allows it, even though Koril doesn't want to. Aniseya allows it, and they get tested. May lies. It works out. Osha doesn't. She wants to be a Jedi. So your thoughts on the idea of taking children, the idea of them wanting to use the Republic law to enforce this kind of stuff. Like, what are your thoughts about how this all went down with these 4 Jedi, and what do you anticipate we're going to find out later on down the road?
Well, one, this was my favorite scene in the episode, was this standoff. And that's not to say that everything was executed perfectly, which I'll get to in a second. But I did really like this standoff. Love that we got some more Carrie-Anne Moss. Again, she is in that Jodie Turner-Smith camp, that everything, she just knows how to work. She knows how to perform in these worlds, in these larger than life worlds. Had no idea that Barry Gibb Jedi was Toman from Game of Thrones. Yes. So watching him with that,
And 1917. He's great in 1917 as well. Yeah.
Watching him without his spirit gum beard and without his receding hairline, I was like, oh my gosh, it's Toman, he's back. Love the de-aging on Soul. I mean, I'm curious how much they actually had to de-age him. He looks like he got pretty great skin. But just the standoff was just great. I do feel like the direction, the ball was dropped again. When Indara says, we have the right to test your children. With your permission, of course. They cut over to Aniseya with with your permission, of course. I'm like, absolutely not. You leave the camera on Carrie-Anne Moss because she's saying with your permission, of course, but that's not what she means. And I think you need to see that on her face. And again, in a 44-minute runtime, I think you have a little bit of space to be like, get that from her, and then get Aniseya's reaction shot, which I thought was great. Anytime I see a Wookiee Jedi, and granted, live action, it's just been this show. It just makes me happy. I know Kelnaka hasn't done a ton yet, but just watching him walk in, so big, so tall with that Jedi robe, and then Kelnaka being the one that senses Osha, I was like, oh, this is really, really enjoyed the scene. The dynamic between Soul and Osha right off the bat, you believe it. You just, and again, this is the performance of Lee Jung-jae. I thought it was curious when he did hand her the lightsaber, be like, maybe this isn't the best way to figure out if someone wants to be a Jedi if you give them a toy. But I do buy the dynamic, and I love the fact that Koril grabs her weapon at one point, thinking like, oh, this could go sideways very fast, which, lends more credence to the theory that we haven't seen everything from the Jedi perspective. Like,
no.
what did they actually do? But the whole thing, I really, really liked. Another kind of bump in the road is after May falls and Soul manages to grab Osha. In the past, Jedi have been able to sense the presence of someone, and Soul didn't sense May's presence, didn't sense it enough. At least that's what we're being led to believe. He didn't sense it enough that they took the kid and ran. So the idea that the Jedi go in and take children, I mean, it's a very intriguing aspect to the story. I mean, and going back to the prequels, like, should they have taken Anakin? Like, was he too old? And seeing that, they have some experience with taking kids that are too old, they clearly didn't learn their lesson. But again, everything with the Jedi I loved. The Jedi basically being the boogeymen who go and take kids.
Mike, your thoughts on how the Jedi were portrayed here, these four, and what they did and the back and forth they had with Aniseya and her Coven of Witches?
I thought there was a lot of good stuff. I think that the main thing that bugged me was when you have these four characters, you have these four Jedi characters. We know what happens to Torben. We know where Kelnaka is. We saw what happened to Indara in the very first episode. So this is like the time that we get to spend with them. And I feel like this episode did such a good job of, like, we had such a clear perspective of who May and Osha were in contrast to each other. And Koril and Aniseya, as I was saying, like, had very clear perspectives. And we get who the Jedi are as a group, but individually, we had the opportunity to and again, maybe we're going to get more of this as we get more of the story. So maybe I'll be like, oh, later. But like, to Shannon's point, like, we have Kelnaka being the one who can sense Osha. And then we have this really weird moment later when May is getting texted where Osha just walks up to Kelnaka and says hi, and he turns to her, and then we cut away. But like, is Kelnaka better with kids? Is Torben more like Koril and ready to dive in, or is Indara ready to dive in and Torben has it like in a very when you have that really tight scene with the Jedi and we have a really cool standoff scene, it's an opportunity for us to sort of have these four characters, and you're like, well, why do we have four characters aside from the fact that we need four people for May to kill in modern times? Like, let's give each of them a little bit of a perspective, like just that one line that kind of defines their personality. And they all sort of just are like a little bit of it, like, yes, a giant Wookiee Jedi is cool. Seeing young Torben and knowing that once you get exposed to the dark side, your hair falls out and you lose an eye, like, that's good information to have. But we don't really get to know them in a more specific way, which I think would help make everything feel more real and lived in. That being said, as far as the Jedi stuff goes, again, this is what's really interesting. Like, technically, Saul is right. The Jedi don't take kids. But the Jedi show up when you have a force-sensitive kid and say, hey, we'd love to take your kid away from you forever and have it have no attachments ever. And because the Jedi are the Jedi, a lot of people give their kids over. Like Ahsoka's tribe did that, and a lot of other people do it. So when Carrie-Anne Moss says, with your permission, of course, it is with your permission. But I think the difference here, and I think what we're going to learn is, and it's exactly what Koril says, if these were just two force-sensitive twins that had been born, and they didn't want the twins to go with them, it's kind of like, okay, well, that's how that works. If you're two force-sensitive twins that were unnaturally created using the dark side, I feel like the Jedi might break their rules and say, we got to take these kids away from these people because this is dangerous. And I think this is where it gets interesting. Like, this is where well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like, to John's point earlier on, this Coven of Witches does seem to be using the dark side, but are they using it for bad? Is this bad? Are the Jedi right? Are they wrong? Or is the Coven right and the Jedi wrong? Like, and what did the Jedi do? Because, like, look, we know Torben felt so guilty about it that he meditated for years and then killed himself. And I don't think he was feeling guilty because they didn't stop the candle fire. So I think, like, when we see what they chose to do and what information they had about this Coven, that's where it's going to be interesting. I do like in general that there are people that just don't agree with the Jedi. Like, they think they're like a group of crazy monks. I think the idea that they steal children would be something that would be a rumor across the galaxy by lots of people. I think that there's a lot of things that the Jedi do. The entire rule of attachment is a really weird rule that just seems to never quite work out for them. So I actually love the idea that we're poking these holes in the Jedi, but we're not doing it in a way that goes, the Jedi are the bad guys. We're doing it in a way, like, I think we're going to see some very specific things when we get more information where you're like, well, from the Jedi's point of view, they were wiping out a bunch of bad dark side force users. But like, since we've seen the other side of that, how are we going to feel about that? I think that's all really, really interesting.
Yeah, I love things being questioned. I'm a big fan of it. I got no problem with it. And it's not like the Jedi have an impeccable track record. No Jedi's ever become a Sith Lord or anything. Like the Jedi are riddled with mistakes and things, because guess what? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, there are just that you can try, but not every Jedi is going to be Kenobi. It's not going to happen. And so clearly, eventually, as you get more and more Jedi, you're going to be privy to their mistakes. Just like any religion, just like any belief system, there are going to be people who implement your belief system who are imperfect and give in to certain things or go a certain way. So, Michael, what you bring up, I think, is really fascinating. This idea of like, well, what would you do if you knew, like people talk about all the time, and I'm not trying to bring the Nazis up in this, but like the Hitler baby, would you kill Hitler as a child if you knew what Hitler was going to do? So these questions. So is that the reason the Jedi is coming in? And look, the perspective I'm having about it is with the information I've been given. It could be later that we see that this Coven of Witches was actually much more darker and evil. The reason they were created, these two, were to do certain things, but it would be confounding to see Aniseya let one of them go to become a Jedi, unless that's always been a part of the plan. I don't know. So from the information I have, they don't seem like bad people. But again, we haven't seen it from the Jedi's point of view. And I agree with you, Michael. I like you advocating for more backstory for side characters. I'm a massive fan of this idea. So yes, I agree with you. More interaction. Give us a little more information on all of them, and let's see what happened here and their connections. We have no interaction between Torben and Dara, and she's his Padawan, or she's her Padawan. So there should have been more interactions on the ship, them deciding to go and do this. But as I said, maybe there are episodes down the road where we get it from the Jedi's point of view and see more of them. I will say this. Look at Torben in the back of this. There's the scar on his eye that we see later. He did not have that scar when we first saw him. So something happened in the interaction with these witches that is the scar that he has when we see him later, when he commits suicide in front of May. So that's a fascinating part of this all. But yes, question the Jedi. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's important to do that. And then we see from different points of view. So we get a more fully fleshed out story here coming down the road. People want to judge this after 3 episodes. We have 5 more to go. And so,
Yeah, I mean, look, my issue, and I mean, this is where I fall into Shannon's camp a little bit. My bigger issue with these episodes thus far is some directorial choices and writing choices that I think are a little sloppier than they could be. Like, that's my biggest concern. But from an actual storytelling standpoint, I think it's interesting. To your point, I mean, the Jedi, when we look at what we know of the Jedi throughout history, their biggest issue seems to be their really strict policies. Like, their really strict policies are what led Count Dooku to turn to the dark side. It's what led Anakin to turn to the dark side. And what's happening here, whatever choices they made, looks like some really strict choices to adhere to the Jedi code. So, like, I think that it's more the stringent nature of the Jedi Order that constantly just gets them in a little bit of a pickle.
Any order is this way. And that's unfortunately what happens because people just rebel against strictness. Even though they want to see the goodness, there is a natural rebellion within most human beings of that kind of stuff. I will wrap up my points on the Jedi by saying this. I'm not in Shannon's camp about the Osha soul thing. That felt very forced to me. I didn't understand why he had this connection with Osha, why she immediately had this connection with him. Him pulling out the lightsaber seemed like a clunky decision in that moment, especially when Koril's like, "I'm gonna cut out your tongue," and it's like it doesn't make any sense. So to me, there was some clunkiness in trying to shove that relationship together and make it a connection. And then later when she wakes up, though, I thought that was a better moment between them when she wakes up and he tells her what happened. And I thought that was a nice acting moment from that young actress playing Osha as well. So to me, there were just a little bit of clunkiness in establishing that relationship between Soul and Osha. So
as far as guesses go, what do you think? What do you think the Jedi did?
I think something happened here between Koril and one of the Jedi, which sparked this battle. And I think that's what you heard the explosion was, in some desperation. And look, Torben is the one that carried the guilt and killed himself. Torben is the Padawan. So maybe Torben, in a scary, desperate, young moment, did something in service of the Jedi that caused that explosion and maybe wiped out most of the Coven. And then the Jedi were forced to take down Aniseya because of the fact that Torben had killed all of her Coven. And so that was the reaction. That's what I'm guessing. And look, I've seen through episode 3. I'm not going to. So this third episode.
You've seen through episode 4.
So sorry, seen through episode 4. So I can't speak any more than that. But what I say is not a speculation from episode 4. So that's what I'll say.
Shannon, what about you?
I think the decision to have Kilnaka repairing a speeder bike was deliberate. Generally, when you see Jedi with downtime, they're not working on their cars. Normally, it's sort of a meditative thing, but the fact that Kilnaka is working on that speeder bike, and then we see a giant explosion come out of that power transformer. The fire, would the fire do that? Of course, but that fire seemed to move real fast.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
But yeah, my guess is it has something to do with Koril. And I did not notice the scar, so Johnny, kudos on the eagle eyes. And can I talk about a little bit of writing wonkiness real quick? We're out of time. Shit, never mind.
No, go ahead.
I think this is the first time we've ever hered the word colleagues used in the Star Wars universe, where Carrie-Anne Moss says, "These are my colleagues." Like, that is terrible. And the fact that the chant is not a great written chant, but them injecting it into the score was so hokey that it was eye rolling. So sorry, done.
No, it was like watching your friend's black box theater production, one person, and you're like, oh man.
Oh yeah.
How much longer is it?
It could have been better. I do think there is one moment early on, which is, to your point about the power generator. There's a moment where all of them are meeting. I think it's the point. It's when Aniseya is showing them how the use of the thread, and then we see the kind of weird slap fight. There is a moment where they hear something near the power generator, and Koril whips her head over, and she goes over and looks at it, and it's the first time we see the power generator, and then there's nothing there. And so what I do wonder, I mean, look, Carrie-Anne Indara is absolutely lying when she says we thought that this planet was uninhabited. They've clearly been spying on them. So they're there for a reason. Were they casing that place? Like, I do think the power generator itself is the key here. Like, I do think that for whatever reason, the Jedi felt they needed to go in and show up that evening because Saul is there. Like, why would the Jedi even be there during all of this stuff going on? And I do think at some point the Jedi do something that blows up that power generator, and whether that intentionally or unintentionally kills all those witches, and whether like they did, I think having the 4 Jedi come in and actually like pull their lightsabers and slay an entire coven of witches is probably more than Lucasfilm is going to do, even if they felt they were justified, unless Koril leads a charge against them. Like, so I think there's going to be a lot of pieces to this that I'm really curious to see how they fit in, but I think the power generator exploding is a definite.
Slay, Jedi, slay. Yeah, no, you don't want to see that, but like, what I think the generator is a great point, Mike. Certainly the yellow, we saw flashes of yellow electricity, and when the explosion happens, it's a yellow light that you see through the grill.
Yeah.
So I think, or the vent, whatever that is, and I think that's a key moment as well through all of this. And Soul, there's going to be questions of Soul, because Soul is the one that definitively tells Osha when she wakes up, may set the fire, may set a fire. So how does he have, and you might be right on this. Did Koril control May? We saw, or did Aniseya do it? Because Aniseya controlled Torben with the eye thing. So who, because when May is staring into the fire, I don't know if I have a picture of that. She is absolutely caught up in that fire. So what is going on? How was she manipulated? When you speculate on that, I agree with that.
I think Soul telling May, I'm sorry, Soul telling Osha, May set a fire, everyone's gone, is right up there with Obi-Wan Kenobi being like, your father was a great Jedi and Darth Vader slew him. You're like, okay.
Or anything more? I mean, there are Easter eggs here with them using the bow and arrows, clearly connected
like the
there.
Night Sisters.
To the Night Sisters there. We see that. We talked about the Plagueis stuff. We see that Torben takes the blood sample, so clearly midichlorian references. The testing of the young Osha and May, they're very similar to how they tested Anakin there in the Jedi Council. So there's elements of that. But how does Osha know the Jedi symbol? Like, are there people teaching them the Jedi stuff? How does she know the Jedi symbol?
It's clearly, I mean, and I could be wrong. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a really pretty maple leaf. But it's clearly, to me, the Jedi symbol. And whether that is she saw it in a dream, whether that is, you know, like, I don't know what it, or she did know more about the Jedi. That could have been, like, I liked it as a visual.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know quite where she saw it.
Right.
The other visual that I like really quickly is the Osha's tattoo is the window that she looks out of in her bedroom.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And the tattoo doesn't appear until the ascension happens. So the
No.
May's tattoo happens. May's tattoo happens with the ascension happens just like the others. Osha's tattoo that she has as an adult, the shape of it is the same as the shape of the window that she's looking out of in her room.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Yeah. By the way, it's now canon that spice creams are available for you to get. This is part of the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge official Black Spire Outpost cookbook from 2019. So that is now canon for you all to get those spice creams.
Terrible name. Terrible name.
Spice. Reference to
ice creams.
Spice creams. Anything more I missed? Anything more you guys want to speculate on in terms of the Easter eggs or the philosophy or some of the moments that were brought up here in this particular episode?
Gotta wait and see what happens next.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. That's our spoiler review for episode 3 here, Destiny from Lucasfilm here and Star Wars. Thank you so much for joining us, whether you're listening to us or watching us. Shannon, what do we have to tell them?
Yeah, if you'd like to follow us on social media, on Twitter, it's at @geek_buddies, on Instagram at @the_geek_buddies. If you'd like to follow me on social media, on Twitter, it's at Shannon_McClung, on Instagram at Shannon the Geek Buddy. If you'd like to follow Mr. Vogel, it is at MKToon. If you'd like to follow Mr. Rocha, it is at The Rocha Says.
Mikey?
Smash that like button, subscribe to Johnny's Outlaw Nation page, check out all the amazing content he's got there. Leave your comments below. What did you think of this episode? What do you think of the Force? What do you think of May and Osha? What do you think of Wookiee Jedi? Let us know below. If you're listening to us on a podcast, leave us some stars and some comments so we go up in the rankings. And as always, the best thing you can do is retweet this video, post it on your socials, send it to your friends, and tell them to hang out with your buddies, the Geek Buddies.
There you go. And Mike, is it wrong that I thought of the thread when she was talking about the thread as the thread of the 3 women in Hercules? Is it wrong that I thought of the thread? I just want to throw that out.
No, it would not be. That is a pretty apt mythological comparison. Well done.
Thank you very much. Occasionally, I am smart. All right, thank you all so much. You guys are amazing. We love you madly. Take care of yourselves. Look for our main show coming up later on this week, and we'll be reviewing The Boys as well later on this week. So look for that, and we'll talk to you next time with a brand new spoiler review here on the Geek Bites from the
Geek
Buddies!